Support for this episode comes from Dexcom. One of the things we love the most about the Dexcom G6 is that it helped Benny become more independent, but maybe not in the way you're thinking. I mean, remote monitoring using the Dexcom Share and Follow let us be more confident letting him do more away from home with friends or at camp. But just the design change of G6 meant Benny could use one hand to insert the sensor. He was 14, he didn't want our help anymore. It was perfect timing. Dexcom G7 is even more simple to use and gives effortless diabetes management that fits into your lifestyle without the disruptions. Ease of use helps everybody, and I'm grateful the Dexcom product designers kept that in mind with G7. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, I talk to a lot of people who have a child diagnosed with diabetes and they decide to write a book. I don't talk to a lot of established children's book authors who decide to write about diabetes. Lisa Katzenberger's newest book, It Belongs to the World, is out right now, and it tells the story of Frederick Banting. We talk about her family's type 1 story, why she wanted to write this book, how the illustrator has a type 1 connection, and we get some insight into what it takes to go the traditional publishing route these days. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I heard from quite a few of you recently who want to know what I am doing for Diabetes Awareness Month. And, I've been in this community since 2007. And we've done a lot of things over the years, but I have come to believe that Diabetes Awareness Month, that November, is really all for people without diabetes. At least my efforts at education are aimed at people without diabetes. So I'm going to do some of that on social media. You will see me out and about. But you all know what's up. I don't really feel like November is anything different for the diabetes community itself. If you feel differently, please let me know. And I'm always happy to amplify what you are doing in your towns. But we're going to keep on doing what we're doing around here, which is highlighting people and technology and all sorts of good stuff that you want to know about in the diabetes community. I want to say a big hello to everybody I met at Mom's Night Out Philadelphia this past weekend. These events are so much fun. They are exhilarating and exhausting in the best kind of way. And I always come home and think, I can't wait to do that again. And we are doing it again very soon. I hope you are following on social because I hear you. I know the cities you want us to come to. Thank you. Continue to let me know. Atlanta is up next. That is in late January. Registration is open. Our early bird special is on for Atlanta. And we will be very soon announcing the other cities for 2025. 4 more next year. And I'm trying to figure this out because it's called Mom's Night Out. But women with type 1 are also very much welcome. We have more and more adults with type 1, women with type 1 at these events. I'm not planning on changing the name, but we may be adjusting how we talk about this because I do feel we have so much to learn from each other. My guest this week is somebody I met at Mom's Night Out Chicago. Lisa Katzenberger's new book is called It Belongs to the World, and it comes out today as this episode goes live on October 29th. She's already the author of many children's books, and she teaches picture book writing courses. Lisa has twins, one of whom lives with type 1 and one who does not. So we talk about that dynamic. And we also talk about what you should think about if you want to write a book and why I think you just shouldn't do it. I'm kidding, but sort of. You'll hear what I have to say. And forgive me, I apologize in advance, but, well, I stand by it. You'll hear it. All right, our interview is coming up right after this. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you're at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more. Go to GvokeGlucagon.com/Stacey. That's GvokeGlucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information. Lisa, it's great to talk to you again. Welcome. How have you been?
I've been good. Thanks, Stacey, for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to talk about this. Of course, I learned all about it at Mom's Night Out in Chicago, but we got a lot of people who we want to share the news with. Before we jump in and just, talk about the book and your other books, how are your kids? Twins, one with type 1, one without, right? What's the summer plan?
The summer plan, an exciting summer plan for my son, Ryan, who's 13, who has type 1 diabetes. He is going to be a counselor in training at a diabetes camp this summer. And that is a very big deal for him because he went to diabetes day camp when he was first diagnosed at like 8 or 9. And then the pandemic happened and he wasn't comfortable going to overnight. And then they stopped. And so now that he has the chance to help younger kids, he's going to be with 6 and 7-year-old kids. When I told him, I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. But he was like, Mom, sign me up. I want to do it.
Oh, that's great. I think sometimes that teen tween age, they do so well when they can work with younger kids, right? We parents, we're not helpful anymore. I mean, obviously we are, but they don't think we are.
Yeah, but no,
working with the younger kids. Yeah. That's awesome. And your daughter doesn't have type 1, his twin sister, but she's going camps and things.
She is going to camps. She's a gymnast and she plays violin. And she's also going to a writing camp, which I wish I had when I was a kid. I'm so jealous.
Wow.
So we've got a busy schedule. So it'll be a lot of fun this summer.
Let's just talk about writing. You are an accomplished author before it belongs to the world. This is not your first book.
No.
Was writing something you always wanted to do? I mean, literally, would writing camp have been a dream for you as a kid?
Oh my gosh, so much. So I remember writing as a kid, like in classes and like in 3rd grade, we had a creative writing assignment. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and I didn't want to stop writing. And I took every class I could that had every elective I could in junior high, high school, college to focus on writing. And I was an avid reader. My mom took me to the library all the time. She was an avid reader, so I followed in her footsteps. And to be thinking that now here I am with books out and people are reading my words, it's wild. So this is all a dream come true for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I mentioned It Belongs to the World, Frederick Banting and the Discovery of Insulin, which comes out this fall. It's easy to think why you would write something like this. I feel like as a parent, I've talked to so many people in the community where whatever they did before, look at me in front of this microphone. I was a radio person before. We kind of make, diabetes a part of our skills. But this is not a typical children's book about diabetes. Can you kind of tell me why you wanted to write it?
Sure. I write picture books for children, and I like to kind of stretch myself and challenge myself. And I mostly write fiction, but I had to challenge myself to write a nonfiction picture book, and I wanted to write a biography. And so I was like, who is someone who is special to me, important in my life, that I'm interested in, that I would want to research, but I think maybe not a lot of people know about. And I was like, oh, what's the word I say 1,000,000 times a day? I say insulin. And so I knew a little bit about Frederick Banting and how he discovered insulin, and I wanted to learn more. It was a challenge to myself to write something I was passionate about and to spread knowledge about diabetes to not only the diabetic community, but to the non-diabetic community as well.
How do you take a story like that? And maybe this is a dumb question, but I am not a children's book author. The story of the discovery of insulin is a wonderful, happy one, but at the same time, the problem that it solved was not. So how do you think about presenting something like that?
As I went through probably 50 different drafts of this manuscript to get to the final version, I really wanted to focus on Frederick and what he stood for. I think he stood for perseverance. I think he stood for selflessness. And he wanted to help and he wanted to give. And so in a book for children, that's what I focused on, is the discovery, his hard work, how he kept going in the face of a lot of obstacles, and how he selflessly sold the patent for $1 single.
When did you think about doing this? Was it as soon as your son was diagnosed? Because as I said, you've written books. You've written children's books.
No, so he was diagnosed between first and second grade, which I think was 2017. I look back at my files. I wrote this first draft in December of 2019. So I knew I wanted to write something about diabetes, but it had to make sense for me and it had to make sense for other people to want to be interested in. So as I started learning about nonfiction and picture book biographies, that's when I said, oh, this is where I can take my passion and knowledge of diabetes and share it with kids.
You mentioned you wrote the first draft in 2019, and then you wrote a bunch of different versions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what changed along the way? I'm fascinated by the process.
I do. So I wrote a book that was focusing on the scientific discovery mostly. To sell a book, you have to write the entire manuscript first, and it has to be ready and complete. And then a publisher decides they want to publish it. So there was 40 drafts right there. Once it got acquired by HarperCollins, I was working with my editor, who's amazing, and she wanted me to bring in more child-centric information. What was Frederick like as a boy? What was it like growing up for him? And so it became broader and focused on not only the discovery, but his life as well. And so those were kind of some of the shifts I made. But I also wanted to share, there's information in the back matter about access to insulin, not getting political, but talking about how Janina Godin, who is the illustrator, had said she sees him as the first insulin for all advocate.
That's the title of the book, right? It belongs to the world. And, as you listen, you might be saying, well, Stacey, you wrote 2 books. Why are you asking her about the book process? Well, I'm self-published and I did have an editor. We took this very seriously and did it like a quote unquote real book. I'm not cranking out copies in my garage. But at the same time, I don't know anything about the world of traditional publishing. And I just think it's amazing. The process of trying to get someone to publish a book these days is very different than it was even 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. Do you mind, Lisa, if I ask you about that? I mean, gosh, it just seems like such a challenge. So like, what's changed? What's your take on what's going on in book publishing right now, especially kids' books?
Oh, gosh. Well, it is harder. Publishing in print are merging. The business book sales are not as high as they used to be. There was a big spike during the pandemic, and now kind of not so much. It came down a little bit. So there's some reduction in staff and things like that, which means there's less room on the bookshelves in bookstores for books. So publishers are acquiring fewer titles. It's harder to get in. But it sounds corny, but I'm going to say it. But like Frederick, I was like, too bad. I'm not going to give up. Like, this is my dream. I really want my books and my stories out there. I know it's stinking hard. I know the odds are against me, but you can do it. And I teach creative writing classes to adults as well who want to publish and write picture books. And I tell them, you guys, you're going to hear how hard it is, but don't you dare give up, because you can make it happen. It takes a lot of hard work, takes a little bit of talent, but mostly it takes a lot of hard work to get.
I think it takes a lot of talent. But that leads me to a question I wanted to ask. You've already mentioned your illustrator. You did not illustrate the book. How do you find somebody? How do you work together like that? Do you write it first and then she kind of sketches out some pictures and you say yes, no? Do they? I mean, I'll let you answer.
When HarperCollins acquired the manuscript, like any publisher, they will acquire a picture book manuscript from someone who's like me, who's an author only and cannot draw a straight line to save her life. And then they will hire an illustrator. So it's the publisher's responsibility to hire an illustrator. And they said they felt it was very important to find a type 1 diabetic illustrator to illustrate this book.
Oh.
So they searched, and I don't know all the details of how that process, but they handled all that. And they reached out to Janina, who goes by Miss Diabetes online. She creates comics about living life with diabetes. And she's got a great profile. Everyone should follow her online and look at her work. She had done some sketches of Frederick before with World Health Organization and things like that. And so they reached out to her and asked her to illustrate the book. And thankfully, she said yes, because her like fun kind of comic style, bright colors really brought in a different dimension to a nonfiction picture book biography. It's a little more playful. It gives a little lightness to, like you said, the heavy subject.
I'm surprised at myself because seen the cover, I read the book. Didn't even look at your name because I knew you wrote it. I didn't look at the illustrator's name. I'm very familiar with her work.
Oh, awesome.
I didn't know her real name, but Miss Diabetes, sure, she writes amazing comics and she's very much insulin for all. That's probably how I found her, was through that beginning of that campaign, which is obviously ongoing. I'll reach out to her. That would be a fun, separate conversation about, trying to illustrate for a mainstream audience too, because even though this is a book about type 1, I'm sure you're hoping that not just families with type 1 read it. I know when Benny was little, we tried to make sure that every one of his elementary school classrooms had a copy of different diabetes books. And some of the kids, like I'd hear from parents, they'd be like, he won't stop reading that, Taking Diabetes to School or the story of Rufus, of kids who don't have diabetes, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
How do you reach families like that then who aren't in the diabetes community? Because here we're doing a podcast, but right, this is going to go to a lot of families that aren't touched by type 1. Right back to the interview, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Edgepark. Life is busy and managing diabetes is a daily, sometimes hourly commitment. Well, Edgepark can help you say goodbye to the worry of managing your diabetes supplies with a variety of cutting-edge insulin delivery systems from brands like Medtronic and Tandem. Plus, Edgepark accepts most insurance plans and handles the paperwork, so you can simplify your life, your diabetes care, and your budget in one click. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Edgepark logo.
That is a great question. And as I start working with the marketing team at HarperCollins, we're trying to find out the answer to that question, which we don't know just yet, but we definitely want this book to go beyond the diabetic community to let people know just more of the history and more of the story. So I'm hoping that we find them, and I'm hoping that people in the diabetic community who hear about this book spread the word. I think books are a great conversation starter. I think it's a way to tell a story, for a reader to observe a story and then say, hey, I experienced something, I felt something from this book, and you might like it too. You might learn something about diabetes. You might learn something about my way of life, my living, my experience, and I can share this book with you as a way to spread knowledge.
Yeah. We started out talking about your kids.
Yes.
Do you mind taking us through your son's diagnosis story?
Oh, I would be happy to. So Ryan was 6 years old. It was the summer between first and second grade is what I keep saying, because that's how I remember it. And I remember he was still at the age where I was giving him a bath. And one day I was like, buddy, I can see your spine. Like I can see your backbone. That's weird, right? I was like, you're looking a little thin. And my husband and I talked about it. And we're like, oh, growth spurt. And they stretch out and kids are doing weird things at that age and everything. And then he was also peeing a ton. I didn't understand this until later, but I remember waking him up from bed, snuggling him and being like, oh, his breath smells so nice and sweet.
Sweet.
Sweet, which, as we know, are all signs of type 1 diabetes.
You shouldn't laugh, but
breath odor. But I remember that. I was like, being a mom is so weird. I love the smell of his breath in the morning. And then he went to a Cub Scout event over the weekend with his dad. And Mike came home and said, Ryan was so thirsty. He didn't want to eat his cupcake. He wanted to walk through the rain. They were outside at a forest preserve in the rain to find a water fountain to get something to drink. He was so desperately thirsty. And then he said he Googled hungry, thirsty boy, and boom, up came diabetes. So we took him to the doctor the next day. They did a finger prick. They said, you have diabetes. You need to go to the hospital right now. And I thought, Ryan's, bless his heart, but a very sensitive kid. And they said he needed to get an IV to get insulin right away. And I was like, they're not going to get an IV in that kid. He's going to be kicking and screaming. This is going to be impossible. I'm not going to be able to watch this. We get to the hospital. We go to Edward Hospital in Naperville, Illinois, which was wonderful. And the staff, oh, I'm getting goosebumps saying this. The staff was so wonderful and so good to him and made it easy for him. He got that IV in. He did all the other medical things he needed to do. And I remember him looking back and saying, I remember when I got to the hospital, I just felt better right away. Like once he got that surge of insulin in him. So we weren't in DKA. We weren't in any emergency situations, thank goodness. And then, he was there for 2 nights and we learned how to do shots. We didn't come home with a Dexcom. At that point, the insurance wanted us to wait 6 months before they would approve a Dexcom. So we did. We didn't have a pump. I might have said that the backwards way, Stacy. I think we did 6 months of shots because we couldn't get approved for a pump, but we got the Dexcom sooner than I was saying. Yeah, that didn't take too long.
It's all a blur anyway, those first couple of months.
And then he had swimming lessons signed up and I was like, I don't know, let's go to swimming lessons. And I just what I know now, I look back and I'm like, how did I let him go swimming without a Dexcom when he was 3 weeks into diagnosis? I hadn't built up any fear yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. You know my story, 7 years, no Dexcom.
Right. Right.
And they're fine. And Dexcom is great. We love them. I hope my son never takes it off and take in as little time in between as possible. Flip, right?
Yeah.
But you learn that you should not fear diabetes. You should respect it. So I think in a way you had a little bit of an advantage there.
I did.
I know it doesn't seem like it. And I'm sure I'm going to get an angry email or two since I've said that. But one of the things I always am curious about is siblings. And you have twins.
Yes.
What was her reaction? How is she doing?
Sydney and Ryan are real opposites. Sydney is stable and straightforward and put together, not super emotional, just like her dad. Ryan is sensitive and emotional, just like me. So Sydney, we really had to, I think, kind of talk to her a little bit how are you doing with this? Are you feeling left out? Are you feeling confused? But she's always been a great support of him. She visited him in the hospital because she was at camp when we took him into the hospital and we got a family member to bring her that day. There's an adorable picture she keeps on her desk still of the two of them at the hospital with their arms around each other with an IV in his arm, his little skinny face and everything. Oh my God. She also went to diabetes day camp with him as a sibling from the American Diabetes Association camp just to support him and be there for him. And she's just been really, really great. And we had her screened. We did that at the diabetes camp. And I remember they were having a hard time finding a vein. And I was like, oh, Sydney, you don't have to do this right now. We could do it later. And she's like, no, I want to. I really want to not know, but she wanted, I think, to be brave like her brother.
Yeah, I get that. That's wonderful. Which I don't mean to be nosy. Does she have the autoantibodies or anything? Did anything come up?
No, she does not. Nope.
I don't mean to be nosy while I ask you the nosiest question.
Ask anyway. It's okay.
I don't mean to be nosy. I've made a career out of it for all this time. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad they're so supportive of one another. It's tough. It's tough to be the kid with diabetes. It's tough to be the kid without diabetes. It's tough to be the parents. Oh my goodness. So they're in middle school, going into 8th grade. What has their reaction been to your books, especially to this one?
Very nonplussed, if I can say. They're proud of me and they say that. But they just think it's a regular thing I do because I've always done this. I've written while they were at swim lessons and at gymnastics lessons and during naps when they were little, squeezed in all the, the little kind of nooks and crannies of writing time I could find. Ryan did go with me to the JDRF Type 1 Nation Summit in Chicago earlier this year. And we handed out postcards about this book. And he was my salesman and he did a fantastic job and was chatting. And then he went to all the vendors and chatted them up and just wandered around on his own. It's fun to see him having his independence, but they're proud, but they're not super impressed like any teenager would be with their parent at this point in
Yeah.
their life.
Yeah. Benny always says to me, "Oh, New York Times bestseller." And I'm like, "Well, no." He's like, "Yeah, I know you're not." Like he's very funny about it. He's like, "Yep, it's my book." I'm like, "Well, I wrote it. Did you even read it?"
Yeah.
Kids are just, they're so funny. Before I let you go, so many people have a diagnosis and write a book. I mean, you're talking to one, right? I wrote a couple of books about my experience. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, but I do feel like my child is diagnosed, so I'm going to write a children's book, or I'm going to write a picture book, or I'm going to write a poem, or I'm going to write something, I'm going to write a guidebook. And I will be honest, there are not a lot that are well done. And I feel terrible saying that, but I like saying it because I'm an old lady now. My son is 19. I can get away with saying, like, take a pause, find out where your talents really lie in the diabetes community. You are obviously a talented writer. You have a traditional publisher behind you. What is your advice? If someone is going to write a book, a picture book, any kind of book, like, where do you get started, especially someone who's not a professional writer?
I would say the first thing you should do is make sure you're reading the type of books that are being published today, not what you grew up with, but being published today. If you want to write a children's book, go to the bookstore, go to your library, ask librarians are great resources, use them, do your research, see what's out there in the market and where you fit in and can provide something new. And take some classes. There's a great organization that I've been a part of for many years called SCBWI, which stands for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And that is where I learned to write children's books. They're a nationwide international organization. They have chapters all over the place. So much of the knowledge is online now through Zoom classes. I teach classes at a wonderful place called the Writing Barn, and it's based in Austin, but I teach online from Chicago. So there's a lot of resources out there. And I would say educate yourself and make sure your passion can go somewhere that will give it a professional feel and make it something that you can really get to people through. Then read lots of books. It's always good advice.
That's always I'll take this advice. I'm not even writing a book. I want to read a lot of books. Do you have a favorite children's book or one that stands out that you read to your kids over and over again? Obviously, this was way before diabetes was in your life.
So Sydney wrote, it's different for each child. Sydney read a picture book called The Midnight Library, and it is about a little girl who runs a library at night for animals.
Oh my gosh.
It's so sweet. And the illustrations are stark, like yellow and black. And she still has it at her bedside table on her nightstand, like all battered up and everything. I'm blanking on the creators' names right now. I apologize, but it is so good. And Ryan's favorite book is just something I don't know the title of. We call it Cinders, and it's about a train.
Nice.
And we bought it at like a rummage sale at their local school. Gosh, this is when we lived in the city. And it's about a train that the caboose gets loose or something, chasing cinders, and it's really long. And we used to try to skip pages, and then they got old enough where they knew the story and knew we were skipping pages, and we had to read the whole thing. And we read that over and over and over again.
I love it. We'll talk after. I'll try to look up those titles and we can see if we can link them up. I will share for me, and you reminded me. So my daughter Leah, and boy, we read every single night, just like I'm sure you did. Yeah. She liked Come Over to My House was by Dr. Seuss, was a really great book for her. And it was a copy that I had as a kid. So it was already beat up and she still has it. But her issue was she liked to know all the names of the background characters in any book we read. And they don't have names. There's just illustrations of all these kids. So I would try to make up names. And then she would be like, that's not what you said last time. So I would pick out names. I would like that book. Okay, I'm giving them all the Brady Bunch kid names. I would pick names from other books or other movies or things that I could remember. That's the Sound of Music kids. Like, oh, it was horrible. Like you said, they remember, you can't skip. They know everything. And Benny's favorite was all of the Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus books by Mo Willems. But, I'm a voice person. Mm-hmm. And so he wanted me to read that book in different accents all the time. I am not good at accents. Terrible, terrible actress. But we would do it in a French accent.
I was like, did you do it anyway?
Tu n'as les pigeons, drive the bus. Like, it was horrible. And we would laugh. We would laugh so hard. So that's what we did all the time. Those were the two books that stand out. And I'm totally embarrassed that I did that, but I'll leave it in the show. Books are amazing. Lisa, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to talk to you. I wish you the best. We'll talk more about the book and, I'll link it up and and we'll go from there. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Stacey. It was so great to share about this book and connect with the community.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
I have a big support group of writer friends who I talk about books and writing and page turns and vocabulary and sentence structure and all these things that not everybody cares about. And so I don't have a lot of friends of moms of children with diabetes, and I wanted to make some. So I came there and you feel like any child, I would imagine, would when they're going to diabetes camp. You feel like you belong, like people get you. They understand what's going through. There's a shorthand you can speak with. And it just makes you feel, it made me feel better. Like, I'm proud I did this for myself. I was a little nervous. I was a little shy, but it made me feel better about myself to go and connect with these other women who are going through the same thing. And it was a really great experience. And I encourage everyone to go.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I'm going to link up more about Lisa, where you can find the book, where you can find all of her books, and more if you're interested in her courses. As I said, she teaches picture book writing. Really fun to talk to her. And I hope I didn't make anybody angry. But I do believe that sometimes our first instinct to write a book is not the best. I will share with you that The World's Worst Diabetes Mom was not my first idea for a diabetes book. I have lots of drafts of some pretty bad books, including a bad children's book. I have drafts of a really bad children's book that's all about Hanukkah, nothing to do with diabetes. And what I possibly should have said was, go ahead and write that bad book because it will lead you to better writing, right? You need to write the bad stuff first. But truly, if you are going to write a book about diabetes, I'm begging you, look in the marketplace, see what's out there, see what's needed, see what uniqueness you can contribute, and then go for it. And you know what? Don't let me talk you out of it. If you feel that strongly, definitely go for it. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
When you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Omnipod 5. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? Unlike traditional tubed pumps, you can try Omnipod without being locked into a 4-year contract. You might even be eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo for full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions. Also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.